So here we go. Hopefully I believe we are now streaming live. So I'm now going to start the recording. I would like to invite everybody to a very special evening we have tonight with some really wonderful people working in the humanitarian sector. And it's also a very special presentation from the Cine Lumière and from RBKC Refugees Welcome Committee. It is our second annual Cine Humanité event as part of Refugee Week. And we are joined as a moderator by Zrinka Bralo, CEO of Migrants Organise, Ifrah Ahmed, of course, who is very well known for her foundation and her campaigning work. Mary McGuckian, who is a fantastic director of the film that I hope most of you have already seen, A Girl From Mogadishu, which was an award-winning film and Berlin this year. And also Alaa Kassim, working in the protection sector in Iraq, who will join us shortly. And I'd like to throw this over now to Zrinka Bralo to moderate our evening for us.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for helping set this up. And we're doing this today because we're marking World Refugee Day tomorrow and Refugee Week, which is a special week for me because as a young refugee woman then, many years ago, I did the media evaluation of the first ever Refugee Week. And the one thing that I found was that in that particular week, the very hateful newspaper that I will not mention did not publish one negative story about refugees or asylum seekers. And that's what persuaded our friends from United Nations Refugees Agency to continue for pushing for the Refugee Week. And that's, I think, what is really powerful about this event and Refugee Week in general, and why we at Migrants Organise supported, despite all the hostile environment and challenges of the lockdown and COVID-19 and the world that we're in right now. It is because it's an opportunity for us to tell a different story, to tell story that and this why stories are important to us, our stories, our voices. And when I say our, I came to this country, to United Kingdom, to London, where I'm sitting now in the semi-lockdown, in 1993 as a refugee from Bosnia. So having seen A Girl From Mogadishu today, there were so many scenes that I could identify with, I could cry with, and I could laugh with. And when I watched this film, I was so grateful because today we work with so many refugees and asylum seekers and women, especially, and people who have been trafficked and who experienced FGM, who are running away from persecution. And it's so hard to paint that picture, to tell that story. And I was very grateful for Ifrah's courage and power of her voice. But I wanted to start this evening with Mary. First, Mary, thank you for participating. Tell us where you are tonight. And also tell us what on earth possessed you to start making this film. How did this film came about? And then tell us a bit more about a film, because it's not, I don't know much about filmmaking, but I know much about refugee issues, and it's not a kind of film that's easily made. That's what I meant. And we need to unmute you.
Good evening, and thank you for having us. And I'm delighted to understand that, well, I'm delighted that you found a way to show the film to mark this very special week in London. So that's that question. Many questions. I'm, as Ifrah is, in Dublin, in Ireland, in semi-lockdown, as we all are. And so a lot of the arrangements for the release of the film basically fell off a cliff in early March. So it is interesting now that we're able to start helping it find its audience. How I came to make the film is entirely down to Ifrah. who I met through the United Nations, and she's a fellow Irish person, and her story is well known. But at that time, if I recall rightly, we were introduced with the idea that maybe somebody would make a documentary, but the truth was there were quite a few documentaries already about Ifrah, and I don't make documentaries. I make dramas, which, you know, and to Andrew's point earlier, that's an interesting road. It's a different exploration, and we have a lot of statistics around refugee issues, race issues, gender-based violence issues, sexual violence and conflict issues, and particularly female genital mutilation, but they're rarely explored from a very personal or emotional point of view. And this seemed an opportunity for that. Not an easy film to make, as you pointed out. It's not a great elevator pitch, but we're in a special time, and particularly in Ireland, we have an Irish film agency that is walking the talk of trying to recognize and write checks, put their money where the mouth is, around inclusivity and diversity in film. So it was an opportunity to try to tell a story that is somewhere the face of modern Ireland. Do you agree, Ifrah?
Ifrah, you need to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thanks. No, I say yes.
Truthfully, it was quite funny when we met. I thought Ifrah was a film. It was in the context of a training workshop for Ethiopian and East African female filmmakers. And I assumed Ifrah, this fabulous looking woman in the thing, was one of the filmmakers, and she didn't stand up to pitch her film. So I went up to her at lunch break or something and said, and so are you, which filmmaker are you? Where are you from? She said, oh, I'm an activist. I said, where are you from? She said, from Drumcondra, in a very Irish accent. And I didn't want to say you don't look typically like somebody from Drumcondra, which is very specific to Dublin. So I said, were you always from Drumcondra? And he said, I have an Irish passport. Do you want to see it? I said, I think with an accent like that, I don't need to see your passport.
Ifrah, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Your story is told from the age of 8, and your journey is told in a film that we think around 300 people have seen just on this occasion and through the virtual cinema. A Girl from Mogadishu. How was that journey for you now when you reflect on the film? Because it's been now, we haven't seen the film, and I invite people to summarize your journey as the Irish citizen now.
I don't know if I'm the only person who doesn't hear you, or is everybody same?
We're having difficulty hearing you, Zrinka. I missed that question. Apologies.
So yes, I'm really sorry. The challenges of Wi-Fi in London continue to plague me through my journey. I was saying, Ifrah, now you've around 300 people have seen the film on this occasion, but for those who have not seen it, could you give us a bit of a background of what led up to the film? Because it covers your entire life or some aspects of your life, but also how was that experience of making the film and self-portrayed? And then we can delve into the issue that you were grappling with here.
I think I didn't get all your question because of the line, but I guess you said something about the movie. So first of all, I want to say thank you for you guys hosting A Girl from Mogadishu online. And I say that tomorrow is World Refugee Day, and we celebrate those refugees who are working and join the hosted country frontline, who actually give their life to save the people who are died for coronavirus and all that. We celebrate with those people and we say, well done, all the work you've done, and they are our heroes as well. As a refugee background, I'm Irish citizen, and yeah, I mean, like for me, it was all about issue. I was close to my heart as women who come to Ireland as a refugee or asylum, and also finding difficult about sharing my personal experience going through on female genital mutilation and some other type of gender-based violence. So I started the FGM campaign in Ireland because I thought that there was a need of raising my voice to give a chance those other refugees who came to Ireland as asylum, who didn't know the culture and existence of Irish medical system. So for me, it gives the opportunity first of all for all to start the campaign. And I remember when I meet with Mary, she already said we met in France, and we met through people that she already mentioned. And for me, it was making different way, bringing my voice in different levels of raising it. And I was so lucky to meet with Mary. And I remember when we always talk, she used to say, she cannot promise, but she will try. And also for myself, thinking as being a refugee or being a country that people, when they hear about Somalia, the first thing comes they hear is that Somali pirates, Somali, it's a green zone, or maybe, coming to their head about Al-Shabaab or whatever. So I take what Mary said, but same time I was thinking, as a woman who is a refugee and all this background, well, I didn't have many hopes, but I seen that face has been changed in Ireland in concept. So I was so happy that, my voice could be raised in a different level and to protect young girls, and also bringing understanding in the European countries, so people will actually learn more about the issue. And as you watch the movie and you mentioned, you said it was every expert. It might be my story, but it's a story of many women. And I give it my testimony. I wanted people to see that female genital mutilation is not just, cutting for girls. We know all the consequence it has, the cutting, and also young girls dying for bleeding, or mother losing during childbirth and all that. So for me, always it was the people, how they become aware on HIV AIDS. I want people to understand and know that female genital mutilation is no difference, because young girls are cut and they die for bleeding. And same time, I come from a country where it's been a war for 30 years. And again, talking about all my, the life I've been through, and many lives that many women have been through. It gives me a voice that I'm sharing with many other women that who've been through and who cannot share their voice. And always I said, I want this movie to be not just a movie for cinemas or just Hollywood, but I want it to be a movie that where the leaders, decision makers, they can make a step way forward to fight an end of female genital mutilation. So I am so happy and glad that tonight it's actually to remark the World Refugee Day, and I think it's a really positive way to screen online, and many people who watch. So we will hear tonight the people's views and people's questions, and I hope all positive. So I really thank you for you guys hosting it, and I hope that it will inspire with a lot of women, and it will bring the level it has to be. Because if we think about Africa, where the practice is happening, leaders, if I talk about our African leaders, is very difficult to make one country. So I want our African leaders also to make it different and think about that, losing even one girl is losing the whole women's life, because you never know what that girl can be in the future. So I'm happy really to be here, and I look forward for the questions from others as well. Thank you so much.
And that's now probably a good time to remind that people can ask questions, and then we will have a session where Andrew is going to relay some of the questions to both of you from the audiences, from people who are watching this on Facebook Live. This is not just a story about FGM, it's also a story about war and trafficking and gender-based violence, and just generally being a woman in the world and being controlled by systems, by structures of patriarchy. But it's not a story of victimhood, it's a story of survival. And that's what comes across as very inspiring about you and your work on both of you. What I wanted to ask maybe both of you, who were the most important allies on this journey of your campaign against FGM, of changing the legislation, of making the film, of bringing this difficult issue into the public consciousness and debate?
Mary, are you going to go first or?
You go first. Well, because really it's the allies around the campaign that matter. Film allies are always the same. You know, it's an industry that but certainly, you know, anyway, that's a different topic. But what the people who Ifrah engaged with phenomenally over the years have been wide and varied, and continue to be supporters, Ifrah, I think, with Ifrah Foundation. I mean, you've got a heck of a team now.
Yeah.
I mean, from the film, you can see that some of the supporters, you know, Ifrah managed to ally herself into understand the. I mean, for me, it's a film about the power of testimony. That Ifrah recognized very early on that not only does testimony have the power to heal, but it also has the power to influence. And she managed to influence people as a refugee initially, but you know, as an asylum seeker, and then an Irish citizen at very, very high levels, very quickly. You know, that is innate talent, obviously, but and those characters, those people in the film really do exist. The Labour Party leaders, the President of Ireland, who's a great human rights advocate, and remains to this day. His wife now is as the First Lady of Ireland, is the patron of Ifrah's Foundation. I mean, that's just to name a few. And then internationally, you've done the same, and you now work with organizations. You partner with organizations all around the world, including the UNFPA in Somalia and the Joint Program, and you know, wide range of philanthropic and other organizations in Europe and America and now in Somalia. So I'm generalizing, but on the way, Ifrah, I don't think you ever differentiated between. What I love about Ifrah, I'll just say this, is that she can engage like incredibly warmly and with incredible charisma with everybody, whether it's the President of Ireland or a beautiful girl in an IDP camp, or you know, the people in the airport, or whatever it is. You're an international traveler of extraordinary.
You see the movie how disturbing I was, and you can actually tell how I was keep going to a Labour Party guy and keep telling him same story every second Saturday, and I thought he was fed up listening to me or hearing me what I had to say, but he was so patient. But I remember always, you know, he was sitting far from me. He might be with someone, just, you know, lean and saying, "Are you back again?" And just keep saying, "Yes, I am, and I will be back till I hear that the bill has passed." And I remember during the FGM bill, he became a minister of development. He became, I mean, like he getting so busy traveling to Africa and around the world. And I remember the day the bill was passed, he was in Turkey. And I talked to him on the phone, and he said to me, "Are you happy now the bill has been passed?" So I was so happy, you know, he was a minister traveling around, he find the time to talk to me. And as Mary said, I can communicate with everyone. And the reason being is that, you know, I never ever, you know, though even we need money to do campaign or activities or whatever, but the reason I worked with everyone was I never asked money, but I asked their voice. So that has helped and raised the, you know, the level of our campaign. And I'm so lucky now getting into Somali all level. And I remember when I was in the European Commission, at that time Vivian Reding was the commission of the EU, and she said, you know, Ireland have a champion, and she said, you know, you can follow what Ireland has done. And I was so happy to hear that, you know, a comment about Ireland. And I feel that if I did and I could do something, I could do same in Somalia. And when I got my passport, I decided, you know, now it's time to end FGM in Somalia. So I am a person that never gives up, and I'm a person that never look back. No matter how much I get disappointed, I keep going, and I just feel like whatever I do, I know one day I will win, and I still believe that if I save one girl's life, I have done such amazing things. And I was talking one of the activists, and she said same, and I feel, you know, we have that power. Says whatever happened to me, I wouldn't stop, because if I can save one girl's life, I will continue. So I think that is where I get my strength.
And there are some wonderful lines that as I was watching the film, I wrote down. I'm assuming, Mary, you wrote them. And one is, if it is not all right, it is not the end.
Oh, well, that actually comes from Ifrah. You know, some lines are the process of making the film, and it was very important for me to do this, because what voice did I really? I didn't have an entire voice. The voice of the film is Ifrah's, and it is why it informed the structure. It is why it is told in the form of a testimony, the story. So Ifrah's a great one for aspirations. So that's one of yours, I think. Well, it's a general one, but you know, a positive, optimistic aphorism.
And for people who didn't see the film and who don't know much about the issue, I'd like to ask you, Ifrah, if possible, to tell us a bit more about what FGM is as a problem on a world scale, because there's some harrowing statistics in that film. And maybe give us also a better understanding of what was your reception and welcome, as it is a welcome committee that's organizing this in Britain, in Ireland, and because it would be good to understand to what extent that was an ally in the process of you becoming a campaigner.
Well, you know, first of all, I remember when I first landed in Ireland, when you are coming as asylum or refugee, you have to go to all medical check, especially when you're under 18. So for me to talk a little bit about what female genital mutilation is, that I remember going to hospital, and for me thinking that whatever it was happening to the medical sector, for me, it was a normal, because I come from a country where the FGM or female genital mutilation, it's normal practice. But, and I remember, I mean, like Somalia practice on FGM 98%. So the number is high. And female genital mutilation has no Islam or a religion in place. It's a cultural practice. Some of the activists, they're so good to talk about deeply in whatever, you know, every bit of details, which I can't do it myself. But in general, a female genital mutilation, for me, it has no difference. Cutting is a cutting, whether it's a 2 or whether it's type 1 or 2 or 3. And FGM, actually, the problem it has is that women, it can get scared or scarce. And also during the childbirth, she can bleed for the female genital mutilation. And also, even when I get my period, I could have a sick, and it's a problem. And then, you know, for me, it's like, I don't know if I can describe 1 or 2 or 3, but they are no different to me. It's a cultural practice. Somali practice 98%, and there is no real Islam in place. And what people motivate is that it's something been happening in 500 years ago, and it was practiced from beginning in Egypt. And it's Egypt. When we talk about Fir'aun, it doesn't have in our religion. Is it just what he commanded to be done? And then Egypt, where FGM come from, is Somalia is higher than Egypt. Plus, when people talk about female genital mutilation is Islam or is commanded by the Prophet Muhammad, that is not true, because Prophet Muhammad, many years ago, he heard a young girl was crying, and he stopped his feet and he said, "Why the baby is crying?" And then he was told that the baby is being cut, and he said, "Don't cut, just make it bleeding." So people take that and make it their own way, and they cut and they sew back everything on women. So if those people understood what Prophet Muhammad means, they could never harm a girl. Because now what they're doing is that harming little girl, cutting her and sewing her back, and then risks of bleeding and risks of even during her marriage for being with her husband first night, she could die for bleeding. She could have a kidney failure. So FGM, it has no in place in Islam, and it has a lot of different consequences that women are facing. That is when I say FGM is like that, because for me, it's, I don't know, because many women, they can talk about, I don't want to bring my anger. I passed that anger a long time ago. Now I want the people to understand. Female genital mutilation is, nothing different than cancer, because you cut a girl, you leave her, and you leave her on bleeding, she dies within 24 hours. Now, especially because of COVID-19, the Holy Quran has been closed, the schools has been closed, young girls are much at risk than ever before, and girls are cut. And the worst thing is that what we now hear in past, like on the 16th of June, it was African Child Day. We were doing a lot of work in Somalia about media and FGM. And what we heard about the journalists, it breaks my heart, because there were some people that they cut the girls, but they could not take hospital because the whole hospital was closed. And the only hospital open was the hospital they were treating the people with COVID-19. So imagine today how many girls has been cut. How many girls are now, we lost it. How many girls at this moment, our mothers are crying because they cannot take them hospital. So is a female genital mutilation is just that, and it's really the worst thing that people can practice, and young girls are at risk in not only Somalia, but in many African countries and also some of the Asian countries. And truly, for me, as I said to you, I pass my emotion. I don't want to cry. I don't want to say, my grandmother did, and my grandmother, she passed away. I don't want to get anger. I wanted that anger to disappear. I want the people to understand simply FGM is very, and is very human rights violation, and young girls should not be cut. And kidney failure. Young girls they are actually dying because of kidney failure. Age 10, age 12, age 15. And families, they don't have money even to take her to kidney dialysis. And girls are dying in Somalia. So there is no reason, and we don't see any reason to be practiced. And that's what FGM is. An island. I was lucky, and I can say that I'm very proud to say I am Irish citizen, because I was given every opportunity that a young refugee or young asylum could get. I'm so lucky that to say I am from Ireland, and very proud to say I'm Irish. And some people, they say there is no Black Irish in Ireland. So I just say I am the first Black person. So I was welcome, and my voice being listened. I was given the opportunity for me to adopt the culture, and I was given the opportunity for me to share a story. I was schools for young I used to tell my story. I used to tell them that, hello, I am Ifrah, I am here. Think about 100 years when Irish people, they've been immigrating in America. Why did I come from that situation? So there is no point in becoming, bullying or racism or things like that. And sometimes when people say Irish is racist, I against that because, it's a win-win when you share your own experience with someone. You tell them your story, they listen. Once they listen to you, they respect you. Because I remember people bullying my scarf and I never take offense. So I think, for me, I'm lucky that I am in Ireland. That's what I can say.
And for people who didn't see the film, you were actually on your way to Minnesota.
Yes, I was. But I found home that I can say now. If I look at now, Black Lives Matter, I always say, look at how lucky I am and where I actually say I belong to. Because if I was in America, I would be shamed by now and I'd be scared and worried about my color. I've been worried about what can happen to my future children or anything. But now I am not worried because I live in a country where I feel safe. And I feel that I am not, nobody is against me, my color or my religion or anything. So thank God I didn't go to Minnesota.
On that subject, and Mary, you tell that story very powerfully in the film. But Ifrah, it hasn't been easy that, that there's the moment for those who haven't seen the film when your trafficker finds you, when you receive threats for your campaigning work. So it's not just that it's not easy to speak about FGM and that experience, but also it's there's still opposition to what you're doing. How are you coping with that right now?
Well, you see, the thing is that if I talk about just reason, it was last year, I think it was last year. There was this imam from one of the mosques. He came on TV and he actually promoted on female genital mutilation. But Ifrah Foundation did a press release, and I remember all the reaction for the Irish government, minister to the prime minister to health ministers, with the member of parliament and public really reacted. So for me, more courage that I get, more I really feel like, I can do it. And especially now, because I am well known in Ireland, and I am not like before where I used to be scared and where I used to get a lot of phone calls and threatening people saying that I should watch out myself and somebody could actually kill me or something. But now that has ended. And the reason is that country knows that I am standing my own voice. And I was told the day I seek asylum, only thing I remember is that I was told that now you're in a safe country and you have a voice. So that has actually carried me. And I say, nobody can bully me and say anything. So that is actually, how but sometimes, people do call. And because Ireland has actually brought the prosecution, first FGM case in January, and I get a lot of call about different people shaming on me, saying, shame on you, what you did is wrong and all that. And I get a little bit worried. But same time, I said, you know what? I did good thing. Because if we didn't know the girl who'd been cut and the family have been prosecuted, we will never, ever know how many girls could be cut in Ireland. So I am very proud that, Irish law being passed and now it's act and there is some cases. So for me, I don't care where I am, how I raise my voice. As long people will hear my voice, I will keep going. And, God is my protection.
And now with the film, Mary, film was launched just before the pandemic hit. How can we do this more often? How can more people see the film?
Well, it was due to have been released on the 3rd of April. So what you saw was it did some festivals and won some awards, for which we're very grateful. And then, of course, everybody's lives fell off a cliff, so we all had to step back. So we're endeavoring. It looks like the distributors now feel, in the new world we're in, that we should be able to reschedule the release of the movie at a very appropriate time, it seems to me, during the 16 days of activism between the day for the International Day of Violence Against Women to Human Rights Day. So from the 25th of November to the 10th of December, we hope in Ireland and the UK that the film will be released and that there will be a campaign allied to the 16 Days of Activism, given the number of gender-based violence issues that the film speaks to. So we'll just have to be a little bit more patient, and we'll get there, and it'll come out. So I'm told by the distributors that the cinemas are accepting those dates. So,
and if any of these big platforms executives are by any chance watching,
yes,
how about that?
The film is there to see. We, as always with films for by and about women, they're hard to get made. They're hard but they are also hard to distribute. There is still a world out there that doesn't believe that there are women who want to go and see films about women, but there are, and eventually we'll demonstrate that to be the case. There's a wonderful organisation which helped promote this screening in the UK called Reclaim the Frame, run by Mia Bays, and they have worked very, very hard to demonstrate to distributors that the audience for films such as this does exist. So we're working with them and working with our fabulous Irish distributors that will get the release back on track. So rather oddly, the trailer has been released because it was released on time for release on April the 3rd, which inevitably was cancelled. So it'll all come back around. So anybody who has a platform or a cinema or feels that it's important for films like this to be made available for a general public, which we really strongly feel it does. And we know the film has impact because we were afforded one or two amazing opportunities, including at the UNFPA 25-year conference in Nairobi, and the impact that very private screening had on the members of state and mission representatives who attended it was phenomenal. Ifrah, wasn't it? They really, it's had an impact on really asking the IGOs and the NGOs, and they've responded to this, to separate FGM in particular as a global issue that really needs to be dealt with in specific countries and cultures, and funding and awareness and funding need to be stepped up. And as they said at that conference, we need to accelerate the promise of ending FGM by 2030. And the more we talk about things and the more we see and the more people are exposed to it, the more likely it is that we'll see some impact.
Well, let's hope Netflix is the next stop. And I mean, for people who've seen the film, they've seen the force of you, Ifrah, when you speak to governments, the UN, the politicians, the wider audiences, and you have now set up your foundation that is specifically working on this issue, and you've got a plan. And that plan, now you've reached, you've changed the law in Ireland, you want to change the world. Tell us about the plan, the 2030 plan, and next steps for your work.
Well, 2030, we want FGM to not exist. So when I grow older, I want to see and say that, we did it. I want to see where young girls are free from FGM, and young girls, when they be asked 30 years, they would say that I'm lucky, I escaped from FGM, I wasn't cut. So Ifrah Foundation is actually, we have 3 pillars: media awareness and advocacy for the Somali legislation. And we have, what was the other one, Mary?
Community empowerment and education programs. You do.
Yeah. Sorry, because I put it together, education and then media awareness. So what happened is that in Somalia, we have done a lot of campaign, and I did 2 different stories about FGM. There was a young girl, 10 years old. She died on female genital mutilation, and she died to bleed. So I went to the village where the girl died, and I did a story with her family. And then I did other story called telling This My Story. And This My Story was about 20 girls we saved from bleeding, that we went back to their family. And we asked questions why did they come to hospital? Why did they want to bring the girls hospital? So the answer was that we heard girl who died in this area and we didn't want our girl to die. So Ifrah Foundation is active in Somalia, and we have three pillars that we are campaigning: the legislation with the Somali federal government, and then we have the community engagement, and then we have the media awareness, which we are working with a global media campaign to do a lot of media awareness. And then we're now going to be working with UNFPA on different projects. So for me, you know, the foundation is actually doing well in Somalia in terms of raising awareness. And also one thing I can say I'm very proud is that now people are just, I mean, like last 3 months, we locked down in because of the COVID-19. Things has made a different way, because father and mothers, grandmothers, they told the girls are at home, they could cut. But before that, things were changing slightly, which means that if mother want to cut the girl, they go to hospital before they cut. When now the girls are at home and the mothers, grandmothers, they all feel that now it's time to do it. So Ifrah Foundation was doing really a lot response of COVID-19 with the female genital mutilation. But yeah, our aim is basically to end FGM 2030, where we want the girl to be free from FGM. And I don't want it next 20 years for me to stand and saying same thing and same thing and same thing again. I want to say that now we can lay back and relax, and we can actually, you know, celebrate the, you know, the beauty of the freedom of young girls, but not again talking about same thing, sitting here again and saying same things when I have a lot of gray hair and I'm just feeling that, you know, I need to rest. So hey, we have a lot of work to do now. And one very disappointing point in Somalia is that we were actually lobbying a lot with the legislation, where we felt that every time we were very close to be passed, but something come up and then it was not passed. So we basically, with Ifrah Foundation, we keep going and do the work, and that's, you know, how is our hope is 2030 to end FGM. And we start in a program called Dear Daughter. So we're hoping that every mothers will write a letter or pledge to their daughter saying, dear daughter, whatever happened to me, I'm not going to let you happen, or I am protecting you. So I hope that Dear Daughter campaign can make a difference for many mothers who have gone through on the same things that we are campaigning now, and they will protect their daughters.
The conscious thing that we became aware of, and certainly the Ifrah Foundation spent a lot of time researching international impact and M&E work around campaigns and programs around FGM, and the needle has not shifted very much after a very long period of time, and the expenditure of not insignificant sums of money. And so one of the things that Ifrah's revised foundation has endeavored to do, and in a way we hope the film in the future as it's released can contribute to that campaign, is to recognize the scale of the issue and the lack of impact of programs to date, and to accept and recognize that it is an issue that needs to be dealt with. It impacts 200 million women worldwide. There are 200 million women worldwide today living with the consequences of FGM. There are 3 million young girls at risk annually from the procedure. It's a massive, that's more than COVID, I hate to say, but it is. And it doesn't get the airtime. The resources required to deal with it need to be at scale. And the only impact that has ever been shown is where it has been dealt with over a consistent period of time at all of, as Ifrah describes her 3 pillars that she's created, at all of those levels, at an influencer level with advocacy, at using media to connect the two, and on the ground at grassroots level with community engagement and empowerment programs. But it has to be done at scale over a consistent period of time, and that rarely happens. When it happens, there's an impact. When it doesn't, there isn't. So that's the massive needle shift that needs to happen.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing that aspect of, it's actually a practice that happens in many countries. So it's, unfortunately not only in Somalia. And we were, this is, and Alaa comes in online just at that right moment to speak to some of that. I was going to say, we were hoping that Alaa would join us. Alaa Kassim is an international aid worker, and she's currently with Oxfam Irak. And Alaa, can you hear us? You just need to unmute yourself.
There we go.
Oh,
Hi.
fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Alaa, we've already had a fantastic, informative and emotional and powerful discussion about the film, FGM, and both Mary's and Ifrah's campaigning work together. And it would be really good. We have maybe like 10 minutes before we open it up for questions from the audience that's watching this live on Facebook. If you could just quickly introduce yourself and just give us an overview of your work with refugees and aspects of the work that have to do with gender-based violence and FGM and women.
Sure. So my name is Alaa Kassim. I'm an aid worker. I've been working mainly with responding to the humanitarian crisis. I've worked with both refugee communities and internally displaced people internationally in Greece, Ethiopia, and currently I'm working with Iraq.
And this is where you are right now, just to
No, right now I'm actually in London. So I'd come for a short visit, and then I was stuck because of COVID-19 in the lockdown, hoping for the airports to open soon so I can return to my duty station. And so a lot of the work that I've been engaged in is primarily to do with humanitarian protection, is primarily to work directly with communities to raise their awareness on their rights, both national and international rights, and sort of trying to address them on a community and an individual basis, on how they are prevented from being exploited. When we're speaking about GBV, I mean, it's current, it's rapid in the settings in which refugees flee or are hosted in. It's very common that gender-based violence is a high risk. So a lot of the time, the work entails to, first of all, understand the context in which the communities and individuals are living in, how they are protecting themselves, and then how we can then, as international organizations, can support them to provide a protective environment for them. Of course, I mean, when we're talking about refugees and IDPs, we're speaking about journeys, very difficult journeys that people take, or because they're fleeing a specific crisis, be it conflict, war, or in the case of, for example, Ethiopia, where I've worked in, is actually a natural disaster. There's a drought. So regardless, it always entails a very difficult and extreme journey. A lot of the time, the individuals that we're talking about are women and children. And a lot of the time they're at high risk of being exposed to extreme forms of gender-based violence, or have already experienced it and are at risk of reliving it throughout that journey. So I'm sorry I haven't been part of the discussion from the beginning, so I don't know where to link sort of answers to what's already been discussed. But that was, let's say, a brief introduction to who I am and the type of work that I've been engaged in for the past couple of years.
And what we've seen, especially since the war in Syria and generated a number of refugees that started fleeing and coming over through Greece and crossing through, walking through Europe, which I tend to call the European crisis rather than refugee crisis. We have seen the hardening of attitudes and harsher and harsher legislation across Europe, and of course here in the UK, efforts to push people away, where policy is officially called hostile environment policy, in order to make things difficult and more difficult for people to seek protection. So it's really important for us to remember that there is this other story of good work that's happening around the world, but also that in this country and in many other countries, and we've heard that, Ifrah's journey and welcome in Ireland has been really important in giving her platform to have a voice and to be heard and to affect the change. And one of the things that very often when we talk about hostilities and negative impact, there's a tendency to reduce people to being victims, but no one is just the sum of their suffering. And there's also tendency, and I'm guilty of that as an advocate and a campaigner, not to talk about good work that's happening in the communities and that are welcoming people. And I really want to give a big shout out to our Welcome Committee that helps put this evening together, and also organize a film screening of Girl in Mogadishu for people, which still can be seen until tomorrow. So people can register and see it for free. And I invite everyone. And we also need to shout about that and make sure that allies and supporters and people who do the work of welcome are also given a platform. It's nearly 8 o'clock. I just briefly saw Andrew. Andrew, do we have any questions from
yeah, hi. Okay, so here I am again. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'd like to remind anybody who's joined us now that this is a very special presentation. We have a very wonderful evening with some extremely interesting people who are all somehow involved in refugee issues and migrant issues, and especially gender-based violence issues. We have the film director, Mary McGuckian, who's made the wonderful film A Girl From Mogadishu, which has inspired our panel discussion tonight. And we also have Ifrah Ahmed, who is, of course, the wonderful international campaigner on whose life the film is based. We have Alaa Kassim, who's a protection worker in Iraq, working right now with Oxfam. And we have Zrinka Bralo, who's the CEO of Migrants Organise and our moderator for this evening. And I'm representing the RBKC Refugees Welcome Committee, and Cine Lumiere, who's also been involved with us for the second year now, presenting films during London Refugee Week, or during Refugee Week as we call it now. And we've had this wonderful discussion, and I would like to now connect a couple of things. One is, one question I have is about filmmaking and about how people present their stories. So I was talking to Zrinka, and she mentioned that we're essentially in the business of telling stories about, in a way, humanizing people that otherwise become kind of this lumped with this label of refugee or migrant or a problem somehow. And Mary and Ifrah and obviously have been very much involved in this, and Zrinka as well. And Alaa, I know you were mentioning some very interesting stories from the camp. You mentioned one in particular. Before we get to the questions, very quickly, you mentioned about a woman in a camp who's who's creating her own magazine. I thought that was a very interesting way of using media to tell your own story.
Yes, no, definitely. A really interesting what you've just mentioned, and around this concept of, unfortunately, I mean, through mainstream media or for various reasons, there is this element of dehumanizing refugees and migrants. This aspect of, like looking at them always as victims, more or rather than individuals with their own individual agency. So some of the work that we do is essentially that, and how to, build individual self-esteem, communicate with them as well with an attitude that you are a person with talent, So how could we speak on that level rather than you're a refugee or an internally displaced person, and I'm an aid worker, for instance. So a lot of the programs is how to basically direct and empower those individuals to run their own activities. The example that you mentioned, Andrew, it's part of a program, it's part of a mobile library, in fact, where community members can come and initiate activities that they would like to engage in, recreational activities. They're using digital devices and so on, and so it helps stimulate and create. When we're speaking about creativity, it sort of opens more doors to creativity. One of the initiatives was having a camp magazine. Now, initially, it was run by youth, so it was supposed to be a youth activity, and at the beginning, it was sort of taken over by young men who were running the magazine, although there was no gender restriction to it. And then there was a notice that women weren't necessarily attending this activity or joining the magazine. Cut a long story short, the women were approached and asked, why they wouldn't like to participate. And one lady who was actually a writer in her normal life before fleeing the war in Mosul, said, well, I want to run a women magazine. And we were like, sure, absolutely, do it. And it was, the outcome was impressive in a sense that she was initially an editor, or she is, collected and empowered other women in the camp to write short stories and poems, in which they did. And some of them also expressed their stories through art and drawings, collated it together, and narrated it, in fact, with the support, of course, of some of our team members. And then we would take it and print it, and it was extremely successful. It was a bi-monthly edition. And it was something that brought the community within that camp together as well, led by a female who had said, I interviewed her myself, that, this is really, although she's still living in a camp, although she's lost her livelihood, asset, home, although she doesn't know when she could go back or she could ever see some of her children. This has given her a ray of hope and made her feel empowered again. And so those are some of the stories that, like, in my opinion, should be promoted, should be used as examples of how we can ourselves as well challenge ourselves to view individuals who have gone through these extreme hardships and became refugees or internally displaced as individuals who have skills, who had jobs, and because of what they had to go through, they are now labeled as a refugee or migrant. But that doesn't undermine their agency. I'll stop. Yeah.
I think that's exactly very interesting. So that's why I think this evening is very interesting, because we have, in a way, we have all aspects of the journey. We have people who've undertaken. We have somebody who's undertaken the journey. We have somebody involved in an NGO in the campsite. We have somebody who's making a film about this, who's turning this story into a work of art. And we have somebody who is at the other end, who is enabling groups like ours to help people at this end when they come to this end. So that's our job. So I think it's really an amazing experience. And then of course, you know, obviously our co-host in a way, Cine Lumiere as well, giving us also from their help to help present things like this. So I'm going to throw it open to some other questions, by the way. And then also if anybody has any comments on any of this, so jump in whenever you feel like. So let me have a look here. So we have, first of all, we have actually from Gabriella. What were the challenges you found when uniting the voices of all those women that have been victims of FGM? I presume that's to Ifrah. And as she also says, it's a very powerful movie. Thanks for your bravery and endless hope. So Ifrah, how did you feel? What were the sort of challenges you had to sort of unite people? Because I can imagine some people, you know, might be resistant to joining together in a group on something so difficult as this topic.
If I talk about Somalia, where I went back in 2014, I remember first time bringing people together. It was kind of going like, go back where you come from, because, you know, I kind of readopted you know, I came to Ireland and the weather is different, the culture is different, and I have to mix my Somalian Irish lifestyle. So I went back with my kind of Somalian Irish lifestyle. And when I first meet with group of people, first thing they say is go back where you come from. And I was going to ask myself, I don't know where I come from if I'm not from here. So I readopted again the culture, and I just being part of those society again, you know, I become one of them. And it was very hard from beginning because, you know, the subject is very difficult, and it's something that people really don't want to talk about. And it's something that people feel is a normal to do it. So it's been hard, but I have to play the game, or, you know, I have to be like them, and I have to explain. If I talk about 3 girls on the movie who I saved from FGM, I was back in 2014 in Somalia. So when I went back to Somalia, I used to go to IDBs in where I stayed. So I could meet with the mothers and everybody. And then I heard that the girls were cut, and I really didn't want the girls to be cut. So I really wanted to save them. In this level, I meet with the mothers and all of them. And the first question they ask me, okay, tell us, were you cut yourself? So I have to deny it and say, no, I wasn't cut. And the second question was, who will marry you? You know, I just go like, it doesn't matter. And then they ask me, where have you lived then? I could never say that I come from Ireland because I didn't want to be kidnapped. So I have to tell them lies and say, I lived in Kenya and I learned a lot about the female genital mutilation, and I heard a lot about the, you know, the death rate and all that. And that's why I wanted to stop. So it's very hard. At the time, it was very hard to bring people together. But now, with respect of the foundation and people, you know, I worked with, I'm so lucky to say that I'm so much welcome to Somalia to actually end FGM. And I feel people are ready, but it's a really long way to go because people wanted to learn about it and people wanted to know the consequence and the risks. So it's just, I have to play as they wanted to understand.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's I can really understand that sense of identity or losing it. Like in Somalia, you're Irish, and then in Ireland, you're Somalian. But sort of, it's, yeah, I can understand that very much. Okay, so okay, so let's have a look here. So this is from Leanne. For her, one of the most powerful moments was when Ifrah arrived in Dublin and had to go through the medical examination with a male doctor and a male translator.
Yeah.
With the FGM bill, what are some of the main changes? Does it mean, for example, that it has to be female doctors and translators? That's a good question. Yeah.
Do you want to answer it? Because you did address that in the legislation very much, didn't you?
Yeah, not only the legislation, also in public, because now, for example, if female with women who undergone female genital mutilation, she required to go to hospital or GB or, you know, giving birth, they are more looked after as to find the female doctors and female translator, or even not female translator, they can do over the phone. So that has been changed, and you know, really Ireland, because of the legislation and also because of the awareness and, you know, people on public to know more, it's actually become now the nurses and midwives are more kind of understanding. But anyway, there are a long way to go, because some of those women, they might not be able to say that they're going through female genital mutilation till they go to hospital, and last minute they told that you have to go to cesarean because of the birth of the child. So still, I think we need to do more work, the community to understand that they should actually, they have, I didn't know that I could request a female translator. I was not aware of that. Female doctor, I was not aware of that. But now I know I have right to say, I don't want this man, I don't want the man, I want the female. So female can understand what, you know, my point of view, where I'm coming from, because it's very hard to explain a man such things. So, but not, before I didn't know. So that is why people in Ireland, especially the women in Somalia, we explain to them that they should actually, they have right to request a female doctor. And it's working, but it was hard. And the legislation, it's actually, it says everything, you know.
Which is very true. From Roberta, we have a question. More of a, it's more of a comment in a way, but she basically says the movie was very powerful because taking this journey with a real person made the experience completely different. It was opening my eyes. Thanks so much. Now, I think that's really interesting. I think this is a question for Mary here. First, you did such a good job that somebody actually feels that they took Ifrah's journey. I think that's incredible. I mean, how, so what for you, when you, at what point did you feel, okay, I think I have this. I think I've captured her, and people will believe that this is Ifrah on screen?
No, I mean, it took quite a few screenings to realize, and it was very, very scary for Ifrah. So we took our time when we finished the film, showing it to people. So the first screening, the very first screening, Ifrah, was just you, me, and some of the crew, because that was shocking, I think, for Ifrah to see her story as she had told it to me on screen. A couple of screenings that I recall that made us feel, you know, there are a number of issues. This, as a filmmaker, one is how do you without objectifying either the actress, the character, or the actress, or traumatizing the audience, tell so many of the aspects of this story. So that was a very fine line, and do it in a way that is culturally acceptable, not just in one culture. Another was, how do you, you know, I'm not a Somali woman, I have not suffered FGM. How do I give voice to that in a credible and authentic way? And then there was doing justice morally as well as legally to Ifrah and her experience. So I think one of the reassuring screenings, I don't know if you agree, was very early on. We had a very small screening in Washington, and many of the people in the audience was at the World Bank knew Ifrah and had known her as a young campaigner. And I always remember particularly Layla Hussein, who, you know, would have been important to you, and I think to me definitely, that Layla would have accepted the film. So that was reassuring. And then I think one of the most powerful screenings for us was in Nairobi, when there were so many Somali women, particularly women of influence in the audience. Do you remember that, Ifrah? And
yeah, I do. And also in that, I remember a couple of women, they come to me, and I remember while we were there, one of the lady come and hug me and said, Ifrah, you didn't tell you only your story, you told every Somali woman who have suffered during the war story. And she said, thank you so much for sharing our voice. So that make me really so proud and say that, you know what, I did it because of many women, it's not just me.
I think for me as a white Irish filmmaker, to have a film about a Somali story and to have so much of Somali culture in it and to have Somali people accept it was very important.
I think also I want to just quickly bring Zrinka back into this. Zrinka, what was your feeling? Because you are you're dealing at this end with a lot of these experiences, and you're dealing with firsthand, and you're helping to give refugees and migrants who might have had a lot of very difficult traumatic experiences, and you're helping basically put legs under them to sustain them. And how do you feel that films like this, and also campaigners, and the work of also Alaa, how does all of this work together to help you in a way sustain people once they actually land here?
Well, it's really hard because of the really harsh policies and how things have changed. I came to this country as a refugee in 1993, fleeing war in Bosnia, which had also horrific, in addition to ethnic cleansing and genocide, had a gender-based violence and rape as a weapon of war, later proved in the International War Crimes Tribunal. And when I compare my experience of coming as a refugee and seeking asylum to what's happening to people now, I feel I'm lucky. And I feel that that's completely wrong. That that there's a basic, the value of human life should not be depending on luck, of the timing when somebody came or where you ended up. As we've heard from Ifrah, it's just like randomly ending up in Ireland and having a good experience, or some people who end up in other places and don't have a good experience. And also Alaa can speak to how it is in Greece and how horrific it is in some of the camps where people get stuck for decades. You have generations born and brought up in refugee camps. So that makes me really angry. And you can see I can just go off into that. And for me, after 25 years of being a campaigner and advocate, I'm angry that things have gotten worse for refugees in European countries, in the United States as well now, instead of getting better. So that I'm not as generous as Ifrah in, I have unresolved anger there. And then I channel that through our work at Migrants Organise, which is campaigning. And I think for me, what's really important, and I'm talking now as a recovering journalist, is not to exploit the story, but for people to be given a platform to share the stories with dignity, which means that they have to own it in a way it has political impact for change. And that's what's really powerful in Ifrah's story. And there is no exploitation, even though it goes in such a gruesome and personal detail, at least in my opinion. Whereas I hate to see people become case studies. Yeah. And that's where a lot of the narrative goes in, where there's a very powerful story, and we all as campaigners are sometimes guilty of that, and we take the story and then we utilize this for either education or fundraising or political campaigning. And it's much harder to take this longer risk of bringing people into and taking the time that it's needed. Sometimes that's the pressure. So that's been part of our work at Migrants Organise, and I'm glad to see that this is the case with this film as well, that it's not exploitative, and that it's owned, and its power relationship needs to be addressed in some of these on some of these kind of storytelling moments, which is that everybody's got a power. Everybody, that basic sense that it's an ability to act.
I think what you're saying is incredibly important, and I have seen in my own lifetime the public perception of the refugee has almost turned what was a really positive word, the idea of refuge and welcome, into almost a negative word in populism and certain kinds of politics. And that's a horrendous journey to have watched happen in our lifetime. And to turn it around is, as you say, needs a significant media campaign. And one of our, Ifrah's executive director actually has moved from running an independent refugee organization in Ireland called Doris Lumini to running the Ifrah Foundation as executive director. And we have often asked her, why did she make this shift? And she said, it is incredibly difficult to work in an environment where not only is there no political will, but public perception is not with the work that you're doing. And it just seemed like an uphill struggle. Whereas somehow the world of gender politics is starting to turn the media perception around. And that's a concerted campaign. And it's something that really needs to be addressed. Just the language that's used, how it's used, how stories are told. As you say, statistics are boring. They don't tend to move people, but sensationalization is also dramatically, slaps you back in the face. There's a medium somewhere that is about authentic voice, and culture can help that.
So we're going to have to draw this to a close soon, and I want to make sure that I read out all of the messages, because we got some incredible messages, some beautiful messages, both for the film and for Ifrah. So I want to actually have a little bit of time to read those at the end. Very quickly, Alaa, what do you think, being on the ground in Iraq and places like Yemen, etc.? I mean, what do you think? How can we get more self-made stories out that will attract, talented filmmakers like Mary and people like us to share those stories? How can we get more stories out of the camps?
Yeah, I think, not to speak on behalf of the humanitarian sector, but the humanitarian sector has been going on for a very long time, in a way that it has evolved. To find a practical way to make sure that our work is empowering, our work is dignifying, our work, though it's temporary, but it's there to help that individual, that particular family to recognize that we're here to support you, we understand your journey, and we're here to support you in whichever way we possibly can. Now, there's all these social elements that come into play that are very much linked to the individual's well-being, physical and psychological well-being, that a lot of humanitarian sector's work is now being directed towards and recognized in importance. That it's not just about feeding people, it's not about giving people clothes and food. No, there is the well-being of the individual that is very important, that needs to be considered. And I don't want to say sadly, but a lot of the time it comes to the representation, and from the end of where I work, we also have to deal with host communities' perception towards refugees and IDPs. And so how do we raise the awareness of the host community, be it the Greeks in Greece, or even within one country, a host community that has now people from a place that they're quite hostile towards. So it's important, in order for our work to be effective, it's important to target both groups. It's important to work on social cohesion. It's important on, focusing on the similarities rather than the differences with different age groups. And And so going back to my earlier point, this is where the sector has evolved. And generally speaking, there's a lot of work that's been done. Now, when we're speaking about refugees, when, let's say, somebody is now traveling to the country that they've applied asylum for, now whether that work continues or not, we don't know. Because once the person, for instance, comes to and Zrinka, maybe you would know about this area more than I do, once the individual reaches, let's say, the UK or France, now it's the government that is responsible primarily. It's the government that is providing the protection. It's the government that is providing the services. It's not necessarily in the case where we step in because the government needs NGO support to fulfill that role. Mm-hmm. And in that particular situation, now, does that work continue? Does that individual or family is supported to not be received in a hostile environment? Is there active education to the host community or to the UK citizens on who the refugees are, on that many of them's dream is to go back to their homes, is to be able to be in their country, protected? I'm speaking about Syrians here in general. Where some of them were doctors, some of them were lawyers, and others were farmers, and the wars come upon them has forced them to flee, and they cannot go back for whatever reason.
But I think last year we showed the film Midnight Traveler, and you know, they had a phone themselves. You know, they were able to film their own journey. And I think, like with this woman who is creating her own magazine, you also mentioned an Iraqi artist. That's the kind of thing that you're finding when you meet these people, and you're being able to support that sort of thing, which right? Is that
absolutely. It's all about, and a lot of it is actually psychosocial work. So speaking to someone on that human level, that, you know, what is, okay, you are, because a lot of the time we're seen as service providers. So when we step in to a camp or a site, it's okay, I want money, I want food, I want clothes. You know, we're labeled as providers of such services. And so protection work is a bit tricky, because I'm not necessarily here to just, even if there's food, money for protection, it's a lot of it is awareness raising, a lot of it is touching upon very sensitive issues, such as the one that the film is talking about, for instance.
Which is, and I have to draw it at a close there, but I think that's a very good point you've brought us to. And so I'm now going to just quickly look on my phone here and get the last of the comments here. So, for instance, we have a really lovely comment here from Sylvie. Just a comment, what a powerful, moving film. Ifrah, you are an inspiring and enlightening soul. So I think it's a good one. From Gina, courage, Ifrah. Watching with these two advocates and activists, keep telling your story, we are listening. Like us, I'm sure you agree that education is key with ending FGM. As young activists, what more can we do within our school and our peers? We have a couple of questions about education which come up. So let me just read them, and then we can finish on that point about education and looking to the future. From Sadiq from the UN Women, East and Southern Africa Regional Office. Salute Ifrah for the courage, commitment, and contributions to promoting and upholding the rights of women and girls. Lots of exclamation marks as well, so it's very, very seriously meant. I'm just scrolling through here. Also from Caitlin, what is your advice for how people can amplify your message as allies? I guess that's hopefully what we all are here. And what are your hopes for the future? What is your biggest lesson in learning? We'll come back to that and let you finish on that. Another question from Raphael. I think that's a little bit off point right now. We don't have time for that one, sadly, Raphael, but he mentioned an earlier question, which we did ask. Then from Megan, I found the film very inspiring. Do you have any suggestions on how schools and education programs in Somalia can contribute to ending FGM when it might be the case that not all the teaching staff support ending FGM, which is an interesting point. And from Raphael, a very powerful movie indeed. I imagine the cultural resistance must be significant. Can you tell us a bit more about that from your experience? And yeah, a couple more, but that's basically it. So I guess, thank you all very much for coming to the panel. And Ifrah, if you could just let us know, what are your thoughts for the future and how do you see education? I guess education both in Somalia and also in our, outside of Somalia on these sorts of issues. What kind of things do you want to see happening, and how can we help to amplify our message? We have activists here, we have a filmmaker here, we have artists here, yeah.
No, thank you so much. And I really appreciate all the people who send their comment and positive messages. And I'm glad that everybody sees that the positive side of the movie. And that's what we wanted from beginning, people to see not a victim, not a refugee, not a Somali war zone. I want people to see empowered women who is making a difference. So I'm happy to see people are seeing that. People can get involved on Ifrah Foundation to support, whether it's to amplify our messages on social media and talking about the issue. People can actually donate. Every little helps. And about education in Somalia, we do a lot of activities in Somalia, raising awareness. We amplify our work through radio and TVs, and we also go to rural areas. So everybody can get involved. They can share the messages. They can talk to their neighbors. They can talk to their friends. They can just follow us and just say it. That's how we can end it.
Would you like to see more women empowering themselves by writing their stories, by maybe filming them, even with a mobile phone, telling their stories, bringing those to the attention? Is that possible in Somalia on these issues?
Yeah, that's what we are trying now to do. A Dear Daughter campaign. We want to, first of all, from beginning to start collecting 100 voices, women and mothers and grandmothers and young girls, everyone. And the reason is that we want women to be empowered, and we wanted those mothers to feel that I can pick a phone and make a video for myself and include. So we just wish that everyone can just feel like they have the voice. Every woman have a voice they can raise, and I just wish that every woman can say, yes, I have a voice, I'm a woman, I can do it. So that's how we can all start it. I started from zero. I am here now just sharing my story on the screen, and that I had the courage to do it, and every woman have that courage.
I think we can hear a young woman of the future maybe in the background.
That is my friends here, so they just come in.
Okay, all right. Well, so I want to thank everybody on the panel. I hope everybody's had a chance to voice what they're doing and how they feel about these issues. And thank you, Zrinka, for moderating the discussion, for Alaa for coming to us from Iraq, Mary for making an incredible film that obviously has had a great effect on people, and Ifrah, very much thank you for joining us and making Refugee Week a very much more special event. And
Andrew, thank you.
Thank you,
Leanne, and the Welcome Committee.
World Refugee Day, it means a lot because reminds to remember every refugees, every people who've been smuggled, who have died on the sea, who have made it in Europe but is still living in a difficult life. Those who have been joined in front line, we celebrate with all those. We actually sad to lose those people who actually been smuggled, but also we celebrate those refugees who are making difference on front lines. And thank you for hosting us, and it's great people to see the movie.
And they still have a chance to see it. So everybody can still watch it until 6 o'clock tomorrow evening in the UK. And after that, I presume it'll be on wider release, hopefully when we all are on wider release ourselves post-lockdown. So let's hope. Thank you very much everybody for joining us. Yes, anything else?
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.